Okay, great. Let's start with a blessing over study together. May the words that come to us out of our tradition this evening and the words that we share with one another open new dimensions of possibility for us in our relationship to how to sanctify our daily experience of eating to whatever extent we aspire to. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right. So, I have a two-part intro. The first part is very brief. I just want to note that in the first two sessions, we have been following a very Reconstructionist process, and I want to be very explicit about that. We began in session one looking at the biblical layer of Jewish history, of Jewish civilization, and then last week we went forward in time and we looked at a number of rabbinic texts from the different layers of the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Gemara, and even looked at a couple of medieval philosophy texts right at the end. So we're going through Jewish history in this course, and as it relates to this idea, this practice of making eating a sacred experience. And I want to, part two of the intro is just to review the key, what I think are the key elements that we have encountered over the last two sessions so that everybody is on the same page, and then we'll dive into the text for this evening. I did, if anyone needs, I pasted the link in the chat earlier, and I'm sure someone else can probably do that, but I can probably do that again too. Okay, link to the text sheet. All right, so week one in the biblical layer of things, we encountered a range of different approaches to the seeing eating as a sacred activity, or making eating a sacred activity. One of the main approaches was placing many, many types of boundaries around eating animals. That has been in Jewish tradition one of the ways that eating has been made sacred, is to be very careful about the consumption of animals for our own nourishment. Here are the dimensions that the Hebrew Bible, or the Torah especially, how it limits this consumption. Only certain species are permitted. An animal must be actively slaughtered rather than die on its own in order to be usable. The blood of an animal that's being eaten must not be consumed. It has to be drained. These restrictions seem to represent a compromise between the vegan ideal of Genesis chapter 1 and the permission to eat meat that comes after the story of the flood. So that's one approach in the Torah. The second had to do with emphasizing acknowledgement after eating that we are not self-sufficient. We are dependent and interdependent. And we are to, in the biblical frame, express gratitude to God, however we understand that word, for the food that we have, for the ability, again, in the biblical context, this is Moses telling the Israelites what they're going to do when they get to the promised land. So gratitude for the meal, gratitude for the ability to reside in the promised land. And this is meant to cultivate humility. And it also grounds the gratitude in the story of God gifting the land to the Israelites and the importance of keeping the commandments. So it's not just gratitude. Gratitude is important, but the gratitude is grounded in a narrative. So I think that's an interesting twist on the use or what it means from one perspective to make eating sacred. We encountered at this layer also the first reference to Passover as a holiday and the eating of symbolic foods, namely matzah, bitter herbs, and roasted lamb, that are meant to connect people again to the story and the experience of the Exodus from Egypt. So both Passover specifically and this blessing that was, or whatever, it didn't say what it was in the Torah. It just said we should bless after we have eaten our fill. But the idea is, in the blessing, we're supposed to keep in mind all these other parts of the story that have brought us to this point. And so too with Passover, although with Passover it's even a little more focused in that each food element in and of itself has a specific symbolic resonance from the Exodus story. So that's unique to Passover. Two other uses of sacred eating in the Torah: to celebrate unexpected good fortune. We saw that in Abraham's victory over the 5 armies. And to show care for those in vulnerable situations, providing food to people who are vulnerable. Abraham and Sarah did that for the 3 guests who showed up unexpectedly at their tent. That is also a sacred use of food from a biblical perspective, using it to care for those who are vulnerable. All right, that's biblical. Then we got to the rabbinic. And the rabbinic texts in some ways deepened what we saw in the Torah, and in some ways there were new things that happened with the rabbis. So they did a lot with this basic notion of limiting the consumption of animal meat. Many new dimensions to those boundaries. What did they do? They more carefully defined which species are permitted in categories that are ambiguous, like birds and insects. The Torah does not do a good job of defining what's in and what's out. So the rabbis really, wanted to be very clear about that. There was a major expansion of the one biblical verse prohibiting boiling a kid in its mother's milk, and that became complete separation of meat and dairy products during meals. The rabbis did that. That was not explicitly in the Torah. Eventually they defined poultry and fowl, as we saw last week, as included in the meat category, even though there's no milk to be had among fowl. But fish and insects they excluded from the meat category. So fish and insects, I know many of us didn't even know that insects were even on the menu in the biblical context, but they were certain kinds, though, not every insect. Only certain kinds. And also, so in terms of the separation of meat and dairy, not only not eating them together, but using separate kitchen and cooking utensils for meals that included one or the other, and waiting times of various lengths between eating meat and dairy. So that was all the rabbis' expansion of these kind of basic restrictions on eating animal meat in the Torah. The rabbis also expanded on this idea of saying a blessing after one eats. And they gave more structure to what that meant. It was very vague in the Torah. They said there are 4 distinct blessings that have to be recited if you've eaten a meal. One is a blessing for sustenance for the entire world. It's interesting. They go way beyond the contours of the Holy Land. They say sustenance for the entire world. And they keep the blessing of the Holy Land. That's blessing number 2. Blessing number 3 is the hope of rebuilding Jerusalem. And blessing number 4 is on the all-encompassing appreciation of divine goodness. So the rabbis really filled out that very vague statement in the Torah about blessing after a meal. Now, they didn't compose the prayers yet. They gave structure and they said which themes needed to be focused on, but they didn't actually compose word-for-word prayers yet. And that came later. But the idea that there were 4 blessings they came up with. And also, they added that on Shabbat and holidays, there were additional aspects of the prayers that needed to be added on top of the 4 basic ones. Okay. Now, they went beyond the biblical requirement for saying blessings saying blessings after they ate, and they said, we need to also say blessings before we eat. The Torah said nothing about that. But they came up with a wide range of blessings over eating particular kinds of food. The most famous one that we know so well is Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. That is a rabbinic blessing that was created to bless bread, but also to bless, that blessing counts for the entire meal. But then they had they had blessings over vegetables and over fruit, and there was a general blessing that was used over beverages and over meat. And then they went beyond even the eating experience, and they created blessings for all kinds of other experiences, like blessings. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's related. So they created blessings over the scent of flowering trees when we smell certain things. The blessing over the scent of flowering plants and spices. Blessings over awesome natural occurrences such as thunder, lightning, shooting stars, rainbows, seeing a mountain range or an ocean. And over occurrences within human society like being in the presence of a great scholar of Judaism. There's a special blessing to say if you feel like you're in the presence of a great scholar of Judaism, and a different blessing that you say when you feel like you're in the presence of a great scholar in some other arena of knowledge. 2 separate blessings. Both of them are seen as important. There's also a blessing that is suggested or given for being in the presence of a powerful political leader. In the rabbinic language, they talked about a monarch, but we would probably translate it as to some powerful political leader. We would probably only say it in the presence of a powerful political leader that we thought was doing a good job. I don't think we'd say that blessing otherwise. So that was all new when we got to the rabbinic layer of things. For Passover, they didn't just stick with the 3 eating elements that the Torah talked about. They created an entire eating ceremony that we all know as the Seder. The rabbis created a Seder, a special meal for Passover, which integrated the food items from the Torah, and they added additional symbols like the green vegetable and the salt water and the wine. They added that stuff, and they wove into all of this symbolic eating a range of texts that talked in different ways about the experience of the Exodus from Egypt. So they created this sacred ceremony that had food at the center that was all about connecting with the experience of our ancestors. That was another way that they deepened this sense of eating as a sacred activity. Besides all of those things, they divided the commandments into 2 categories of rational and non-rational. And they said the rational commandments anybody could have come up with, any group. They just make sense, like do not murder and do not steal. They didn't think you needed revelation for that kind of a commandment. But for these other commandments that you wouldn't have come up with from a rational perspective, one of which is eating which animals are kosher or not, or not combining meat and dairy, those fell in for them to the category of non-rational. They didn't have an obvious explanation, but they had to be observed nonetheless. There was this one radical rabbinic text that we saw where the author said, do you think God cares about which animals we eat and don't eat? It was rhetorical because he said no. Do you think God cares about whether meat and dairy are separated? No. But the commandments are there for the discipline of doing something that was commanded. So there was just one rabbinic text that was kind of I thought it was an important one for us to see. Then we did a little bit of medieval Jewish philosophy. We looked at one text from Maimonides and one text from Nachmanides, both of whom were part of the special Spanish Jewish, this very unusual period in Jewish history where there was a fair amount of conversation going on between the Jewish community and other religious communities, and also between Jewish religious knowledge and what was considered general secular or general knowledge at the time that was based on Greek philosophy and science. So both of these rabbis were coming out of that particular cultural matrix. And Maimonides, both of them tried to explain, after the rabbi said, we can't explain why we keep kosher, both of these philosophers said, oh, there's got to be a reason. Here's what I think. And Maimonides said, I think all of these kosher laws are because, and he was a physician, by the way, in addition to being a rabbi and a philosopher and an author. He said, I think all of these commandments about what we can and can't eat, it's all about health. He was a real outlier in that. Most Jewish thinkers did not say that was the reason, but Maimonides said, these are about health, and then he went on to say why. He explained why each element of keeping kosher was healthier for people. But then Nachmanides comes along and he says, no. I don't think Maimonides is right. And he gives a really great reason. Nachmanides said, if Maimonides were right, then the entire non-Jewish world would be sick all the time, and only Jews would be healthy. But we know that that's not true. So it can't be about physical health. But I think, says Nachmanides, I think it's about spiritual or soul health, and that the animals that we eat have energies that when we bring those energies into our physical beings, they have an effect on us. And so he would say if we eat, carnivorous and scavenger, the meat of carnivorous and scavenger animals, that will make us more like those scavenger animals. So that was his rejoinder to Maimonides. So that is just a summary of what we've been through. I hope that the sense of not development, but that evolution, that change over time is clear, and that in some cases that change is continuous, where the rabbis took something from the Torah and built on it. And in some cases, the rabbis created brand new dimensions of sacred eating. Okay. If there's anything that's unclear, if there are any questions of clarification at this point, we can take those, and then after that we'll jump into our session 3 texts. Any clarification that anyone wants on any of that stuff? Okay. All right, great. So, these texts are a little bit of a mishmash, I confess. Um, they were, in the official kind of, schema of the class, these were supposed to be kind of a combination of medieval and early modern texts. And they kind of are, but sometimes I've got a very modern person referencing a medieval or Hasidic text rather than the text itself. So I apologize for that. Like this first text, this rabbi is a contemporary conservative rabbi. He's retired, but he's a conservative Jewish theological seminary. He was the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary for many years. Very well-known guy, Ismar Shorsh. And actually, this text, this is actually not yet chronologically where we're meant to be, but I realized I totally forgot last week to include this text. And so I thought we needed to see it before we went any further. And my suggestion this evening is that for every text we look at, I would invite you to think about, do you see in this text more continuity or more innovation vis-a-vis what came before? And secondly, are there any elements in the description of the approach to sacred eating in these texts, that feel like resonant to you in any way? And it doesn't have to be like, literally resonant, but you might say, oh, the feel of this, I can see that it speaks to me. So keep those questions in mind as we go through. All right. Now, is there someone who would be willing to read this first text on page 1? And you can either raise your hand physically or electronically. Do people have this text sheet? Were you able to access it, I hope, from the Google Doc folder? Okay. Alan Binstock, thank you. And then Barb will get you the next text. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. What became of the altar in Jewish consciousness after the destruction of the Second Temple? The rabbis transposed it metaphorically into another sacred key, the Jewish home. The altar became the table at which the family gathered to eat its common meals. It is the consumption of food which connects the two institutions. Thus, Rabbis Yochanan and Reish Lakish in 3rd century Palestine conceived it to be a locus for reconciliation. In the days of the temple, the altar served to atone for us. Now it is our table that atones for us. Rashi, in his comment on their assertion, suggests that the atonement is affected by inviting guests to our table, that is, in repairing our relations with people outside the family. I take the counsel of Rabbi Yohanan and Reish Lakish to mean that mealtime is to be used to reach out to loved ones, to share ideas and experiences, to show understanding and compassion. It is even a time to bring God into our frenetic lives. The conversation around our surrogate altar is to be illumined with flashes of eternity. According to Rabbi Shimon, whenever 3 people dine at a table without any words of Torah, it is as if they had consumed the meat of the dead, i.e., a sacrifice to a false god. Again, the link between the temple and our table is alluded to. A meal stripped of Torah remains a purely physical activity.
Thank you, Alan. Okay. So he's here referring to Talmudic texts, which we are supposed to be moving away from. But this idea of the altar, the table in our homes, being the replacement for the altar in the temple, and that the eating of a meal is kind of like, is metaphorically compared to making an offering. That's an interesting, may not work for everybody, but I think it's a very interesting kind of approach to framing eating as a sacred experience. Lila. Were you raising your hand to read? Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. You're going to be after Barb. Thank you very much. All right. So, we'll do one more text, and then I'll maybe ask people to reflect on the question of continuity versus innovation in these two texts. Okay, so Barb, you want to read Shneur Zalman of Liadi. He is the founder of Chabad Hasidism. He was a second-degree disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. So a very big guy, but he's going to start off referring to what came before, earlier even than the Hasidic movement. He's going to refer to a form of Kabbalah, the mystical part of Judaism, and so that's why. So this is kind of a combo text. It's from an early Hasidic rabbi, but he's referring to a late Kabbalistic text. Go ahead, Barb.
The great Kabbalist, Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari, 1534 to 1572, taught that every created thing possesses a spark of divine energy that constitutes its essence and soul. When a person utilizes something toward a godly end, he brings to light this divine spark, manifesting and realizing the purpose for which it was created. In all physical substances, a material husk, klipa, encases and conceals the divine spark at its core, necessitating great effort on the part of man to access the spark without becoming enmeshed in the surface materiality. No existence is devoid of a divine spark. Indeed, nothing can exist without the pinpoint of godliness that imbues it with being and purpose. But not every spark can be actualized. There are certain impregnable elements whose sparks are inaccessible to us. The fact that something is forbidden by the Torah means that its husk cannot be penetrated, so that its spark remains locked within it and cannot be elevated. Thus, one who eats a piece of kosher meat and then uses the energy gained from it to perform a mitzvah, thereby elevates a spark of divinity that is the essence of the meat, freeing it of its mundane incarnation and raising it to a state of fulfilled spirituality. However, if one would do the same with a piece of non-kosher meat, no such elevation would take place. Even if he applied the energy to positive and godly ends, this would not constitute a realization of the divine purpose in the meat's creation, since the consumption of the meat was an express violation of the divine will.
Thank you, Barb. I know. Okay, so that's an interesting text. Okay, so let's pause here and let me ask. First of all, does anyone have any questions about, this second text, there's a lot of, I tried to give a little context, but the whole spark image comes from a kind of a new creation story that this Rabbi Isaac Luria came up with, and that at the beginning of creation something went wrong, and the vessels that were supposed to hold the energy of creation, they couldn't, and they exploded, and so all the sparks from the energy of creation got embedded in these different all throughout the material world. And this is actually one of the, not the only, but one of the original ideas for tikkun olam, repairing the world. But the way you do it here in this context is very different from the way we use it. The way you repair the world is you engage with the world from in a correct way, in a religiously correct way, following the tradition, but also you have to your intention is important. He did not mention that so much in here, but your intention to free the spark has to be there as well. Anyway, any questions of clarification before we go to the two kind of general questions here? Okay, don't be shy. Barb, go ahead.
If I go into a kosher butcher and purchase some meat, I have to trust that it's been done in the correct way and therefore is truly kosher.
Right.
So there's an element of trust that is
Ah,
required. Trust within the community.
that's great. Right. And we I don't some of you know that in the history of the Cleveland Jewish community there was a very infamous Chinese restaurant that was supposed to be kosher that the traditional community would eat at for I think quite a while, and then it came out that they were not using kosher meat. So speaking to Barb's point of like, and that was, you can imagine the upset that people felt when they discovered that they thought they were eating kosher meat and it turned out not to be. Yeah, great, thank you, thank you. All right, so in either of these two texts, do you get a feel that it's more continuous with kind of what's come before, or do you feel like it's more innovative, or do you think, I don't know? So and if so, either way, how? That's one question I thought would be interesting for us to. And I don't think there's not like a correct answer here. This is an interpretive question. And even if it's like a gut feeling, that would be interesting to hear too. You don't have to like. Lila? No? Sorry. Okay. Okay.
I have
Alan.
something.
Bruce. Okay. All right. Bruce and then Alan. Go ahead.
Sorry, I should have raised my hand.
That's right.
I didn't go to kindergarten. The first one about the table, the altar, I think is an intriguing combination of both things. It was a big innovation in order to maintain continuity.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruce. Alan?
I think yeah. Oh, okay. I think the first one is an innovation because it switches the focus. The focus initially seemed to be about the meat and how it's, prepared and what you eat it with. And here they're saying, no, the focus is on the connection between the people at the meal. And that seems to be that seems very different to me
Mm-hmm.
in terms of an innovation.
Thank you, Alan. And Alan Binstock, did you want to respond to this question?
I think Lila has her hand up.
Oh, I think
No?
she's got her hand up to read.
Okay, that's right. Okay, yeah. I'm commenting on Rabbi Schneur Zalman. The theory is that there's a divine spark of energy in every living thing. And then he draws the distinction about you have to eat kosher meat because the non-kosher meat, you can't derive the good energy from it. And there's no real explanation. It doesn't make sense. I mean, the non-kosher meat has it says every living thing has the divine spark. So the non-kosher meat has the divine spark as well. And there's no explanation here as to why eating the non-kosher meat doesn't provide the same energy.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some tension there. Right. And presumably, and then it raises the question, if a non-Jewish person were to eat the non-kosher meat, would that release the divine spark? I mean, that would also be an unusual, I mean, but in a way it would be in consonance with this idea that, right, it is pervasive all throughout creation, this divine spark. So it's, yeah, very interesting. Thank you. And Kevin, please.
Is it the divine spark limited to only living things? And that's one question. And would a tree or a flower have a divine spark, for instance?
Absolutely. Trees and flowers for sure. And I think even inanimate dimensions of the universe would have, because everything physical has this kind of underlying spiritual reality. Now, in this text, he doesn't explain how one might go about releasing the spark in a stone, for example, or a tree for that matter. But yes, those sparks exist. They are everywhere. There's no place where they don't exist. So yeah, Alan Fetterman.
Allow me to be a cynic for a minute here.
Sure.
I just look at this and I say, he's trying to make an excuse for eating a living thing. And the excuse is what cannibals used to say about eating a person and getting the soul of that person when they ate it. I missed our first session, but it seemed like from what I've gathered from what you've said, seemed like a lot of this stuff is they feel eating a living animal, killing it and eating it is wrong, and they're trying to rationalize it. That's how it feels to me. I'm expressing that.
Yeah. Thank you. Maxine.
So I have a question. My kids keep kosher, and one day I came in and I thought I was using the right pan to cook something, and it wasn't. So I had to remove it from the house and replace it. My question is, if, as sort of happened to me, but the people who were eating what they thought in the restaurant that was the Chinese restaurant and it wasn't kosher, is there a rule that the rabbis came up with as to what they have to do? Like wash your mouth out with soap or, which is what my parents had us do. Something wrong, but it had nothing to do with kosher food. But is there something that they're supposed to do if that happens?
I love that question. Yeah, that's a great question. I am not aware of any kind of, remediation that anyone has to do. There, the rabbis do have this thing where if you accidentally put a little bit of meat in a milk soup or vice versa, there's a way to decide whether it's been ruined or not and it's not usable. But that's a slightly different thing. So it's a great, I don't know. And that would be worth doing some more research on. I'm not aware, like what happened if you would drop a Torah scroll, right? You have to do tshuva you have to be repentant for that. So, but in this case, it wasn't the fault of the people. Yeah, interesting. Good question. Barb.
When Moses, in response to the thirst of the people in the desert, strikes the rock and it gives forth water, isn't that sort of a demonstration that rock had that divine spark and so could tie into the divinity and produce whatever is needed?
That's really interesting because the commandment was to speak to the rock, which is really interesting.
The second time.
The second time, right, right, and when he gets punished and can't go into, yeah, the first time he uses a rod, and God tells him to use a rod the first time, and it all works fine. But even in the second version of the story, when the idea that he would speak to a rock is really interesting in terms of this whole question of, that there is some, that somehow God can't just make the rock bring forth water. The rock has to cooperate, on some level. So, yeah, that's that's terrific. Really, really
And I'm
interesting.
smiling because the image to me comes of a pet rock.
Oh, yeah, right.
Now, that's when
Right.
you're between a rock and a hard place.
That we could this could be really, we're heading into Purim territory here. That's good. We're almost there. Lila or Steve, I'm sorry, Steve and then Lila. Yeah.
So the second reading, where the spark, one achieves the spark by eating kosher food, um, just seems like an extension of some justification or reason to have the ritual in place. You mentioned that there was no real good explanation as to why, although Maimonides thought there was a health benefit. But if you can get a spark out of eating the kosher meat, and that should be that should be the justification for doing it. And doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but you can see why there would be a certain segment of the Jewish population that would adhere to that and want to pursue it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's a third justification for why the laws of keeping kosher are the way they are. So absolutely. Absolutely, that's correct. Lila, do you
I actually do have something to say,
please, yeah, go ahead.
which is just that reading through that, the second quote, I just brought to mind my grandmother's description of like the first time she had non-kosher meat. And it was kind of the opposite. It was like she was, there was so much blood in it. It seemed felt like she could taste it, and it seemed hyper animated in some way.
Hmm.
And so, she did not keep kosher by the time I met her, she was not keeping kosher. I don't know when this, um, but there was a sense that, that kosher butchering took away some of the vitality of the meat.
Huh. Wow. That's really interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And actually, Lila, if you want to unmute again, and we're gonna go on to the second page, and we're gonna hear the first three readings on the second page are all different Hasidic teachers. First one is Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. He's very familiar to us. All the world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to be afraid. So he is the author of that. It's a little bit, his original text is a little different than that, but that's okay. But he's going to talk about eating. And the second teaching, this guy, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, he was a contemporary of the Baal Shem Tov and one of the first disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. So that's where he comes from. And this third rabbi, Tzvi Elimelech, he is a slightly later, he's like the generation after Nachman of Bratslav in the Hasidic dynasty. So Lila, why don't you read all three of those?
Okay, let's see. Yeah. Don't. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav on the purpose of eating. Become the kind of person who makes fulfilling physical needs a spiritual experience. Some people eat to have the strength to study the Word of God. Others, the more spiritually aware, study the Word of God in order to know how to eat. Whenever possible, avoid eating in a hurry. Even at home, don't gobble up your food. Eating is an act of holiness. It requires full presence of mind.
Good.
And teaching by Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, a great principle in serving the divine is this: in everything you do for the sake of heaven, see to it that what you do.
Oh, sorry, bad. Yeah.
Just an extra word in there.
Yep.
See to it that what you do will immediately be a service of the Lord. When eating, do not say you are eating for the sake of heaven, in the sense that the food will give you strength to serve the Lord. Although, did I miss a word here?
No, you're good.
Although this too is a good intention, the ultimate perfection is for the act itself, in and of itself, to be an act for the sake of heaven. Okay, I get that. And the third one, Rabbi Zevi Elimelech of Dinov, everything in the world contains holy sparks. When food and drink are permitted by the Torah, when food or drink permitted by the Torah are consumed, they become part of our body, turning into blood in human flesh. We, in turn, utilize this strength gained from this nourishment to study Torah and to do mitzvot.
Great, thank you. Right. So actually, this last text sounds exactly like what Alan and maybe Steve was saying about. This is like a right on the nose here about the sparks coming into your body, because there's this other idea of sparks is that they get released to go back to their home, in the divine reality. So this is very much like, no, it's coming into my body, becoming part of my physical self. So let's stop here. And what do people sense? You feel more continuity, or do you feel more innovation in these texts? And I know there are various different levels that we're comparing it to. So, yeah, Alan Binstock?
Seems to introduce the whole concept of mindfulness in eating. You shouldn't be distracted by other things when you're eating, that you should be focused on this act as a divine act.
Yeah, and so does that, I'm hearing you say that you think this is that part is an innovation from your perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Any other thoughts about these three texts and where they sit on that spectrum? I will just say, so in case you're wondering, my goal is that we're going to finish reading the text, and then we're going to circle back and we're going to ask the second question about all of them in terms of, like, do you feel resonance? We'll get to that at the very end. Okay. All right.
I was just
yes.
going to say the first one sounds very much like you would expect of mindful eating. Don't do anything. I mean, that seems like, the sort of Hasidic, any mundane thing you do can be done joyfully. It should be done joyfully. And then, and maybe it was just because I was reading, but I got kind of confused between the next two about what is okay to do with the food for the Lord and what is not okay to do. And so, I don't know, are those two in conflict with each other?
Well, I think I actually think that the Nachman of Bratslav is in deep conflict with Tzvi Elimelech.
Right.
Because Tzvi Elimelech is saying the reason that eating is sacred is because we use our strength from the food to go and out and do whatever, to study or to do mitzvot. And Nachman is saying the opposite. He's saying that the act itself is really the ultimate focus, and all of our learning is only useful to the extent that it changes our experience of eating, and it helps us to see it as an intrinsically sacred act. And then Yaakov Yosef is kind of in the middle of those two, I guess, where he's like, well, it's okay to think about this as using energy to do God's work, but the ultimate perfection is the act itself. So I think he goes a little more towards Nachman at the end. So it's a little confusing. I totally agree. Thank you. Thanks for that. Maxine?
Here we go. Reading this last one and thinking about the draining of the blood, I just wonder, this idea that you hear that non-Jews talk about Jewish people drinking the blood of children. This thing where it says, when food and drink permitted by the Torah consumed, they become part of our body, turning into blood and human flesh. It just reminds me that, is that where that concept comes from?
I understand why that came up for you, but no, that is not. And it's interesting because, we've looked at all these laws that explicitly say you can't.
Right.
So the irony that of the blood libel that Christians came up with, that it's like the furthest thing, in Jewish law, it's been outlawed since the early part of the Torah. Not only is it outlawed for Jews, in the Torah context, it's outlawed for everybody. You're not supposed to drink the blood. So anyway, but I get that it kind of has that graphic feel to it. But it's I think he's just trying to be very emphatic that when we eat, it really does gets transmuted into the stuff of our physical being.
It made me think of transubstantiation. So there's something like extra physical about the description. It didn't just sound like nourishment. It sounded like a transformation into,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, it does seem a little, yes, supernatural or something. Great. Okay. Let's go on. The next three are a little bit longer. So we're now going to move further into the modern period. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, German Jew, 19th century, founder of modern Orthodoxy. He is the guy. If all modern Orthodox Jews look to him, and he is the person who created this idea that you could be Orthodox and still live in the modern world. You didn't have to this goes a little bit, I think, to what Alan Fetterman was talking about last session, about this idea of being totally separate, that Jewish culture, in terms of keeping kosher, maybe that was one of the effects of it, and maybe that was even one of the intentions of it, was to keep Jews and non-Jews separate. But beginning in the modern period, that value really started to break down. And Samson Raphael Hirsch was one of the champions of that from an Orthodox perspective. Now, he's not going to talk about that here. He's going to talk about something related to the eating ritual that we have. But someone willing to read Rabbi Hirsch? Julia? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Just to just as the external temple, which represents your holy mission and to which you should sanctify yourself, becomes desecrated by impurity, so are these foods impure and unfit for your spirit, as far as they are all of them the living place of activity for your own being, which is summoned unto holiness. If you have eaten them, not only touched but absorbed them into your system, you may be more nourished and better fed, but the instrument of this but the animal instinct will be aroused more strongly within you, and your body becomes more blunted as an instrument of the spirit. Your heart, instead of being holy, instead of only striving for holiness, namely your sublimity over everything animal-like, is drawn down to the animal, or become the more apathetic and dulled. Your spirit is now faced with a fiercer battle and is less equipped for the fight.
Thank you, Julia. So that's right. That's intense, right? It's let's just quickly on the continuity innovation scale. What do you guys think? And do you see anything new in here, or do you think it's basically just a restatement of stuff that we've seen?
No, the idea of impurity is new, I think. Isn't it?
I mean, it's new in the sense that he's worried that we're going to take impurity into our bodies and desecrate. That's a strong word, right? Desecrate our bodies in the same way that the holy temple in Jerusalem could be desecrated if anyone brought an impure object into that space. Yeah.
So I keep being reminded as we're talking about this of something John and I talk about a lot, which is about he said Jains mostly, a certain sect of Hindus that don't eat garlic. They're vegetarians and don't eat garlic. And I keep wondering, why not garlic? Why not garlic? What is, and we finally looked it up. And it had to do with the spirit, the fieriness that it gives you. And that is similar to what, you don't want the meat inside of you. You don't want any impurities in you, and garlic is one of those things. This is an oversimplification. I'm probably getting a lot of it wrong, but that sort of sounds very similar to what he's saying here, in that what you are taking in is impure and will raise your blood pressure and make you too spirited, then it is a bad idea.
Yeah, I've never heard that thing about garlic. That's fascinating. And it would be really interesting to see writings from the Jain tradition about, if it gets framed in a similar way. I think there are absolutely parallels. Right. I don't know if this felt a little bit kind of, Greek to people with there's the animal and physical on one hand, and there's the spirit on the other, and the bad food brings you closer to your animalistic self, which is bad, and the right food, the kosher food, allows you to have access to this more spiritual side of yourself. So it's so that's okay. Samson Raphael Hirsch, as far as he goes here. Okay. We're going to do Abraham Isaac Cook. We're going to a little bit from him. He was the first chief rabbi of Palestine in the 1920s. He originally from Eastern Europe. He was a traditional rabbi. He was a mystic. He was a really serious mystic, and he was a poet. And he wrote some really interesting poetry. And he actually, for his time and for where he came from, he had a pretty universalistic dimension to him. And one of the interesting things about that is that his son became kind of the spiritual godfather of the modern Messianic Jewish, not the Jews who want to take over the entire, land of Israel and want to rebuild the third temple and all of those things because they want to bring back and they want to take part in that, doing that themselves. Abraham Isaac Cook's son is the spiritual source for a lot of these people. Anyway, but here he's going to talk a little bit about eating animals. So, and it starts at the bottom of page 2 and goes on to the top of page 3. Alan Fetterman, you want to read this?
Sure. Certain cruel philosophies, especially those that denied belief in God, according to their views on human ethics based upon reason, have advocated that man completely stifle within himself any sense of justice for animals. However, they have not succeeded, nor shall they succeed, with all their self-serving cleverness in perverting the innate sense of justice that the Creator planted within the human soul. Although sympathy for animals is like the glow of a smoldering ember buried under a great heap of ashes, nevertheless, it is impossible for them to negate this sensitivity within every feeling heart. For as a rule, the lack of morality among all humanity consists in failing to heed the good and noble instinct not to take any form of life, whether for one's needs or physical gratification. Sounds like he's advocating for vegetarianism. Right. Our sages did not agree with these philosophical views. They tell us that the holy Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was visited with afflictions because he told a calf being led to slaughter that he had sought refuge in the skirts of his garment. Go, this is the purpose for which you were created. His healing, too, was brought about by a deed when he showed mercy to some weasels. They did not conduct themselves like the philosophers who exchanged darkness for light for the sake of pragmatism. It is impossible to imagine that the master of all that transpires, who has mercy upon all his creatures, would establish an eternal decree such as this in the creation that he pronounced exceedingly good, that it should be impossible for the human race to exist without violating its own moral instincts by shedding blood, be it even the blood of animals.
Thank you, Alan.
So,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
Alan said, is he a vegetarian? This sounds
So this is a big controversy in the traditional community, because he sounds like a vegetarian in many places, but in other places he's not a complete vegetarian. He continues. This might be an anecdote. I don't know if this is absolutely true. I've never read this, but I've heard that he would eat chicken on Friday night. That was like his one non-veg, or I don't know what he did with fish, but he ate chicken on Friday night. There was this tradition, and I've heard that he wrote about it, that he thought that people who were complete vegetarians could become judgmental of people who were not. And so one reason that he continued to eat a little bit of meat, was that it was a way of remaining grounded in humility, instead of feeling like he was holier than thou. But he clearly has a lot of empathy for animal experience. And he also believed that in the Messianic period, in Messianic days, there would be no more eating of animals by humans or by other animals either. He thought that was all gonna go away. That was part of the messianic, vision. And, and he points to certain prophecies by Isaiah, the lion will lie down with the lamb. And he, I think, understood that relatively literally, that it was that the nature of animal behavior would be changed. And he also believed that animals would gain a greater level of consciousness in the Messianic period, and such that they would even be able to learn from humans. Anyway, that's not anywhere in this text, but yeah, he does.
They'd
He's
be
got strong.
studying,
Sorry?
they'd be studying Torah, of course, the animals, when they
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Thank you. Kevin?
I almost lost my train of thought going to there. For most people today who eat meat, the act of shedding blood is so distant and so foreign, they never think about it.
Right.
And I remember, college or grad school days, there was a film going around that showed how the slaughter process worked. Not in the big factories, but one-on-one. And it had an effect on people at the time to see that. But I think the problem is that when you pick up chicken wings or something, you don't think about how that chicken got slaughtered.
Right. I heard a story recently, maybe one of you even told it to me, of a family, and a kid who was maybe 5 or 6 years old or something, and they ordered chicken. And he turns to his mom and he says, "Isn't it funny? Like, that's called chicken, and then these birds are also called chicken. Isn't that weird?" And she couldn't bring herself in that moment to connect the dots for him. But the other thing that what you said brings to mind is he was kind of a teacher of mine when I was in college, and he had this principle or whatever. He said he didn't think he thought anyone who was a meat eater should have the experience of slaughtering an animal. Like that's the only thing that could justify someone being able to eat meat, is if they actually took part in that process. So, which is that's an intense thing. But no, it's obvious, right? It is so distant. Absolutely, no question about that. Okay, so we got this traditional Orthodox kind of vegetarian-leaning guy. We have to do a little bit of Mordechai Kaplan, right? We can't not do Mordechai Kaplan. Kevin, you want to read Mordechai Kaplan? Great.
Yes, please.
Okay.
In the next stage of the Jewish civilization, the laws of kashrut will not be observed as dietary laws commanded by God, or as mystic symbols of what someone must do to qualify themselves to enter into communion with God. But these distinctions should be maintained as traditional folkways, which add a specifically Jewish atmosphere to the home. Such observances should not be regarded as intended to help one earn salvation in the here or in the hereafter, nor to produce a marked effect upon one's character. Maimonides' argument that the forbidden foods have a physiological effect which is prejudicial to the mind or spirit is scarcely worth considering. Equally untenable are the so-called hygienic reasons which are advanced in defense of the dietary laws. Such justifications are gratuitous from the ancient point of view and unacceptable from the modern point of view. But if Jews are not to exaggerate the importance of the dietary practices, neither should they underestimate the effect those practices can have in making a home Jewish. Once these practices lose their character as laws and become folkways, Jews will be able to exercise better judgment as to the manner of their observance. There need not be the feeling of sin in case of occasional remissness, nor the self-complacency which results from scrupulous observance. Moreover, since the main purpose of these practices is to add Jewish atmosphere to the home, there is no reason for suffering the inconvenience and self-deprivation which result from a rigid adherence outside the home. From the standpoint urged here, it would not be amiss for a Jew to eat freely in the house of a Gentile and to refrain from eating treifa in the house of a fellow Jew. By this means, dietary practices would no longer foster the aloofness of the Jew, which, however justified in the past, is totally unwarranted in our day. As for the fear that social intercourse between Jews and Gentiles may lead to the disintegration of Judaism, the reply is obvious. If Judaism is inherently so weak that it requires the artificial barriers of social aloofness fostered by the dietary laws for its maintenance, the very need for maintaining it is gone.
Thank you, Kevin.
Wow.
Yeah. He did not. He was a straight shooter, right? Although sometimes his words were. It was sometimes hard to get to where he was shooting or where he was aiming. But this is actually a relatively understandable piece of Kaplan text. There are many that it's difficult to really understand what he's saying. But here it seems, relatively straightforward. So, okay, continuity, innovation.
I mean, he's basically saying there is no point of it except not what he's saying. My interpretation of what was read is that there's no point other than to make sure that we stay Jewish. And it has nothing to do with spirituality. It has nothing to do with health. It has nothing to do with the Torah. It just has to do with this is the way it is. This is the way it's always been. And if we want to keep going, we got to keep it.
Yeah. I mean,
even
right,
if the alternative is more delicious. Just
and you can have the alternative if you are anywhere but your house. It's freely, and this is all about the feeling in your house versus the feeling and many, well, even relatively traditional Jewish people who keep kosher strictly at home have a practice where when they go out to eat, they don't worry about it at all. So, right. So there's a kind of continuity, but yeah, go ahead, Alan Binstock.
I think you have to look at the historical context too, and that is the desire by Jews to be accepted by the larger society and to assimilate into it. And you can't do that if you're totally strict about kashrut.
Great. And that was one of Kaplan's big ideas, was we live in two civilizations, right? We are living in the Jewish civilization and we're living in the American or Western civilization. So, and both of those have value, and we are, it is to our detriment if we reject either of those two parts of our lives. And I want to Alan Fetterman, I remembered what you had to say. I think also about again the fallout of observing kashrut, that it, or the purpose, or one purpose of it, which was to keep Jews, apart from non-Jews. So here at least Kaplan is really dissolving that dimension of keeping kosher. Catherine.
I find the term social aloofness fascinating. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I'm gonna sort of think about it overnight, but it's not it's not two words that I don't think of somebody choosing to follow kashrut as being aloof. Um, I think of it as a very strong thing to do. And it's sort of very decisive. And so I need to think about that a little bit. I don't know if there's any context that I don't know about for those choice of words.
That's a great question. It just feels very Kaplanian to me, I have to say. It's, he seemed to be a master of putting terms together and creating new terms that seemed, he couldn't. There were often times when there wasn't a term that he could find that expressed what he was trying to express, and so he'd either borrow one from a very different part of culture, like his definition of God as the power that makes for salvation. That's a very awkward, difficult expression, but that was, for him, that was the purest way of describing what he meant by when he used the word God, the power that makes for salvation. So it's a good question.
But
Audrey.
No, I was just going to
Okay.
say, isn't he referring to like, I can't eat at your house because you don't keep kosher? I mean, that's the certain, you know what I mean? That why it seemed like an aloofness or a hierarchy along the lines of, I can eat at your house because you don't keep kosher enough. I don't know. That's
Yeah, no, I think that is what he's talking about. I mean, that could be and that could be an inference that someone might make. Like, that might not be the intention of the person observing kashrut, but it might feel that way to a person who's receiving the message that I'm just I'm not able to join you for dinner.
Yeah, I guess I think, I'm looking at the definition of aloof, which is cool and distant.
Yeah.
Um, and somebody who refuses to eat at your house, they're not cool and distant. They're basically, kind of telling you, I'm not going to eat at your house. It's sort of stronger than cool and distant. I don't know.
Huh.
It's just interesting to me, that choice of word.
Well, if something comes to you, we will look forward to because it's an interesting expression. All right, Audrey, and then Steve Bass, and then we're gonna start to wind up.
So, what I'm uncomfortable with the Kaplan reading is American culture has this sense of America and meat eating are so deeply ingrained. One of the things I loved finding out about India is that it's considered a higher level of spiritual to eat vegetarian. And I've known a number of people that when you eat vegetarian, I mean, there's all these other elements that can, it's kind of like it's like, are you so needing to bend to the larger culture that you totally give up your values? And I'm just very uncomfortable with the Kaplan reading and that. I mean, America has so many bad habits. I mean, shall we all eat terrible hot dogs? I mean, it's just so
I'm just so uncomfortable with it. I really
Yeah.
am. And I just want to say one other thing. I've known a lot of people with a lot of dietary, um, ways of eating. And my grandfather was a vegetarian. And,
Huh.
partly to respect a person is to find a middle ground. Like we wouldn't say you can't eat, he wouldn't say I can't eat with you. He would just eat vegetarian things. So I think there's a middle ground being vegetarian, or being, keeping kosher.
Right, because you could imagine that someone who is a strict vegetarian might make the same decision as someone who's strictly kosher and say, I am not going to sit at a table where people are using a fork and a knife and carving up a piece of cow. I won't put myself through that. So, and I won't sanction it by joining in this meal. So I can imagine that that same, and again, I think, and it could not come from necessarily from there might be warm feelings towards the person, but like really strong, deep feelings about being in the presence of animal consumption. So yeah, Steve Bass.
Yeah, this works very well for me. A
Ah,
couple of examples. I have some Orthodox friends who recently came over our house actually to join our book club, and Nancy and I we were just fearful how we're going to do this, and that was that type of tension was unfortunate, and what Kaplan is saying is almost akin to having a mezuzah on your doorway. That mezuzah is the entry place into your domain, and that's where my Jewishness lies. That's where the spiritualness is. That's where my home is. And the idea that you keep kosher in your house is akin to having that mezuzah on the door. You're out of your house. There are no other mezuzahs in restaurants or other people's homes. And out of respect for our friends and others, I will just uh, be adherent to what goes on in my kitchen. And I really like that flexibility and sensibility as to, in terms of making food a spiritual exercise. I mean, I can't think of a better way of 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 allocating kashrut to the home as an example of your Jewishness and spirituality. Anyway, that's my thoughts on
thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for kind of segueing us into this last piece of kind of, and we don't really have a lot of time left tonight, but thinking about if there are elements either, on a very basic level or in a more kind of, interpretive level from any of these texts that speak, that feel like, oh, this is an interesting thing for me to think about. I could see, maybe the possibility of that it could be, either it reflects what an approach that I already have, or I'm intrigued with it. So let's see, Lila.
I was going to say, I mean, I don't feel like any of these are a real pathway, but it reminds me of, I've had friends. I used to have this friend I did pottery with, so that gives you a lot of time to talk while you're doing pottery. And her husband wanted her to start keeping a kosher home, and she said to him, "I will keep kosher at home when you stop eating, treif when you go out to eat." And I mean, there's just, I don't know, there seems like a mixed, I'm not going to be able to articulate this, but there's no pure path here. There's no, besides vegetarianism, it doesn't seem to me like there's an argument that holds sway over any other
Thank you, Lila. Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to be, I want to clarify that in this question, I was thinking about, you could think about the entire, the entire set of texts that we looked at. And you could even go back before this class if you wanted to, but just interested in thinking about what might have resonated. Steve, I am thinking that your hand is up, not because you have another comment, but because, okay. All right. Thank you. All right, Celia.
I've been thinking about my own journey, starting out as someone who didn't even really know anything about kosher to keeping a relatively kosher home. As we talked about the other day, Steve, every single person who keeps a kosher home has their own rules. And so we have our own rules, like we eat any cheese. I don't really look at the package to see what cheese I'm buying, but I do separate my meat and and I keep kosher meat and et cetera. But listening to the rules or how those rules were interpreted, I really liked it. That people put their own flavor on it. To me, it's just really important that you do it in a way that makes sense to you and that you honor other people's honor and respect other people's way that may not actually be your own. And if you're in their house, you try to follow them if you can, their kosher rules. So I would be more strict in a more strict house, or I think you have to go with the flow a little, but also be true to yourself. And there's only one other thing I wanted to say. When my kids started to keep kosher, I told them they had to keep kosher in my house, but out of the house they did what they wanted to do. And they were 13, 10, and 7. They were young still. My girls would eat out of the house. They wouldn't eat kosher. And Rick was very, very strict. He was angry at his sisters because they were not eat kosher. So but they all then started to keep kosher everywhere, like a vegetarian out of the house, etc. And it was to me, it was just an interesting thing of self-discipline for them to do something that they hadn't done before, and also just keeping their religion in mind wherever they went. So there's just so many reasons to do things the way people do them, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Celia. Yeah. And it points out too that I think one way of looking at this set of texts is that they were we looked at a bunch of different ways that different individuals in Jewish history made sense for themselves.
For them.
Why they were participating, why they were observing.
People still do that today.
Absolutely. And that's people in our movement would say that is a wonderful thing. Like that's the, some places would say, oh, no, people aren't doing their own thing. But we would say, no, that's what it's all about. It's about making meaning as much as you can from drawing on the cultural resources, the religious resources of our tradition. So, all right. Well, thank you all. I want to say that, so it's going to be a little more than 2 weeks until our last session. It's going to be 2 weeks from Sunday, 2 weeks from this Sunday. So I think it's the 22nd of February, the next time we're going to meet. And that'll be really focused on the most recent kinds of thinking around kashrut and also around, it's interesting, the whole question of how to find, and also around like this whole idea of saying blessings, which I think is could be a powerful form of Jewish mindfulness. And so that's what we'll focus on. And I'm going to invite you to continue to think about, were there any, again, elements, even if they weren't a direct connect for you, but like for example, the text where the guy talked about, when you eat, think about how you're going to use this energy to go serve, do God's will or whatever. But so not taking that on a literal level, but like, what would it be like to think while you're eating, how can I use this energy to like do something good in the world? Like, what if you had, how some people dedicate, you dedicate a class to something, you dedicate, an experience. Like, what if every once in a while you dedicated a meal to, may this meal give me the strength or the energy to do something specific that I feel would make a contribution. Anyway, that's an example of like kind of taking something and but then expanding it to a, kind of on a more abstract level. All right, Audrey, last word. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on.
Where were the readings? Because they weren't in the update.
They are, they're in the Google Drive folder, and I'm going to paste it one more time in the chat, and you can get to them that way. Or you can always get to them using the Shabbat. You know how every Shabbat there's a link that says, service materials, click here.
Yeah, I tried to do that though. So
If you search spiritual eating, you'll find it. Just put it in the search for like your shared documents.
It's like whatever it's called, the folders embedded in folders embedded in folders.
Yeah.
So you have to go up a couple of levels.
But Steve, only you have to have permission to navigate all the levels.
Oh, you have to permission to navigate. I did not realize that.
Right.
Got it. Okay, so that doesn't work. I take that back.
Eating and sacred, you'll find it.
Okay.
Promise.
But you can navigate because that's how I found it ahead of the meeting.
Oh, okay.
So
cool.
Eating, say that again, eating
as a sacred activity.
All right.
Or click on the.
I was looking for it before and I couldn't get to it.
I just put it in the chat.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Barb. Okay. All right. Have a good rest of the night, you guys, and a nice Shabbat and weekend. And I will look forward to session 4 in just over a couple of weeks. And thank you, Kevin, for helping with the hosting, and thank you, Alan Fetterman, for setting all this up, and I think Bruce too. Okay, good night.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.